If you're new to my channel, my name is Suzanne. I am a certified astrologer with specialties in evolutionary and horary astrology. I also specialize in the modality called human design. I use the symbolic language of astrology and the study of energy and cycles to help my clients find their way back to their authentic selves. Okay, so this video is going to be focused on the Neptune North Node cycle. And if you've been paying attention, Neptune and the North Node have been inching closer and closer together since the nodes transitioned into the Pisces-Virgo axis at the beginning of the year. But it won't make its exact conjunction until February 4th. Neptune and the North Node conjuncts every 18.6 years, and it conjuncts the South Node in the middle of that cycle, so every 9.3 years. But this is a very special conjunction because it also aligns with the major lunar standstill, which only happens at the end of a lunar cycle. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I hadn't actually planned on doing this deep dive because I was so focused on the Mars-Pluto cycle, but something kept nagging at me in the back of my head, which is funny because I was born right after Neptune North Node conjunction. I was born after the Neptune conjunct the North Node at the end of 1974 in Sagittarius. So it's kind of funny that I didn't even think about this conjunction until it was right in my face. And that's how Neptune kind of works in my life. You know, I discover my path as I walk it. And it's very difficult to trust this process because sometimes I'm led astray. And that's exactly what Neptune does, you know. My teacher in evolutionary astrology used to describe Neptune phases as this process of gaining immunity or learning to be more sensitive to what is true versus what is false. You know, Neptune veils. And in the shadow expression, it reminds me of this fairy tale. I don't know if you've heard it, but you should probably read it if you haven't. It's called The Pied Piper of Hamelin. And it reminds me about how the Pied Piper hypnotically led the children toward their demise. And I'm really getting this vibe right now. I am seeing with my own eyes how quickly our country has been divided over the past 20 years. And, you know, everybody's kind of identified with whatever they've been conditioned by, while thinking the other side is the one being conned. There is a complete lack of trust in the other. And it actually feels like I'm in a liminal space that is between time, and I'm looking at both parts, both sides. You know, the energy of Neptune can be elusive, and it can lead you astray until you become more conscious. It can seduce you towards something that appears life-sustaining, but is in fact empty, a fantasy, a con. Neptune can definitely be demonstrated as propaganda. And I would say we are living in a time of both overt and covert and contradictory propaganda everywhere we look. And there's been a concerted strategy by outside forces as well as inside forces to destabilize our country. And this is one way that it's done with Neptune. Okay, so let's start talking about the Neptune North Node cycle in more detail. Now, first, I want to give you an overview of the moon's 18.6-year cycle. I'm not going to go into the astronomy too much here because it's an advanced topic and it can easily get confusing. I just want to orient you to the cycle overall, especially as it relates to the major and minor lunar standstills that I was talking about earlier, and how this shows up in the collective environment. It was really helpful for me to understand how this was showing up in the environment around us just recently, and I hope it is as helpful to you to understand this and take a kind of a more objective point of view to what's been happening. So, as you can see demonstrated here, and as is demonstrated in transit chart, the nodes are not static. They move along with the Earth around the ecliptic of the sun as the sun's gravity pulls it in space. And the moon's nodes specifically move in a counterclockwise position as it's moving. And so it goes from Pisces to Aries. And when you get to 0 Aries, we experience what is called a major lunar standstill. Now, this is observed as a modulation in the outer extremes of the moon's range of rising and setting. And when it's in the middle of the cycle, or when the North Node is in Libra, you have what is called a minor lunar standstill. That's when you experience the minimum monthly range of the moon's rising and setting. Now, this image is trying to illustrate that. So at the end of the cycle, we get a minor, or the middle of the cycle, we get a minor lunar standstill. And at the end of the cycle, we get a major lunar standstill. Now, we are experiencing the peak of this cycle right now as we just moved through the 0 degrees of Aries. And that peak happens at each end of each cycle, with observable consequences extending for at least 3 years around the peak years. So think about this as 1.5 years approaching the major lunar standstill or the minor lunar standstill, and 1.5 years afterwards. And we'll talk about what this means in a minute. So why the term standstill? The sun's annual cycle in changing sunrise direction behaves like a pendulum. The sunrise direction changes rapidly from day to day near the equinox, like the rapid motion of a pendulum at mid-swing. And there is a stopping or a standstill at the solstice, like the outer limit of the swing of a pendulum. Over the 18.6-year cycle of the moon, the changing moonrise and moonset direction behaves like a compound pendulum system. The fact that the moon spends more time with the monthly range of rising and setting at the outer extremes, or the major standstill, and at the inner extremes, or the minor standstill, than at the middle extremes is the reason for the use of the term standstill. Now let's review the interpretations of a major lunar standstill versus a minor lunar standstill. During a major lunar standstill, what we're going through right now, the moon exceeds the limits of the sun. It's Aries energy, Mars. This is the yang, or highest part of the 18.6-year cycle. The public's reactions are more extreme during this time. It's a time when feelings are not just felt, they are experienced in their raw, unfiltered form. This period can bring about significant emotional revelations, making it an excellent time for therapy, deep introspection, and understanding one's emotional health. Now, during a minor lunar standstill, there's a lower emotional landscape. It's Libra energy. This is Venus. The moon is trapped inside the sun. It's yin, the lowest part of the 18.6-year cycle. The public reaction during this time is more controlled. There is more discernment over our emotional reactions. This period is ideal for finding emotional equilibrium, for reflecting on one's emotional responses, and for developing strategies to maintain emotional stability. The insights gained during a lunar standstill can serve as a compass, guiding us toward our inner path and helping us to make decisions that are in alignment with both our inner and outer conscious selves. The last major lunar standstill was in June 2006. Do you remember this time period? I do. It's when I started dating my current partner, and I do remember the energies were quite dramatic that year. Now, the last minor lunar standstill was in November 2015. I bet you can remember this time period. So that was when the nodes were flipped, and the North Node was in Libra, and then it transitioned into Virgo. For those of us in the States, this just happened to be the time period when Trump was running for his first term in office. Now we're at the other end of that cycle. You see how the tides have turned much more favorably in his direction in only half a cycle. How different everything feels since he last took office. But there's also this deja vu feeling. This can be the feeling of a reverse nodal return in general. Similar themes show up, but from a different orientation. Right now, that feeling is really disorienting for some of us. Trump himself was born during a full moon lunar eclipse with the moon on his south node in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is also the traditional ruler of Pisces. And his north node is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. Mercury is also the ruler of Virgo. Now, while he wasn't born on a lunar standstill, or even when the moon was out of bounds, a full moon eclipse has a very similar energetic signature. He was also born when Mercury and Pluto were out of bounds. His Mercury is in Cancer and his Pluto is in Leo. He is known for his outsized emotional rhetoric and his need for absolute individual power. He also has Uranus on his north node, and Uranus is a co-ruler of Aquarius. But eventually he's going to have Pluto opposing his own Pluto if he lives that long. Now, another interesting signature shows up. I hope you can follow me. I don't have a chart right now, but I'll review it in a minute. He has Neptune in Libra conjunct Chiron in his natal chart. And this was present in the chart of the Neptune North Node cycle in 2016. We'll review that chart. He also has a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer in his natal chart, and these two planets are in the Neptune North Node conjunction in Washington's 4th house this year, as we'll see when I review these charts. So these signatures are showing up again. The repetition of this cycle is really important for his specific evolutionary journey. And I think it's important to point out here that whether we like it or not, everyone has their own path of evolution, and our paths are all intertwining. Our leaders, the people who are in the public eye, are the ones whose natal signatures closely remembers the transit weather of the times. Trump is our country's catalyst. He's shaking up the established order. Now, the longer-term results of this kind of shakeup are hard to predict. We may go through some painful times, but it also may remind us what we truly value as a people and as a country. Remember the pendulum. There is always the swing to the other side. That's why it's really important to try not to get caught up in the extremes as much as you possibly can. Venus will come around again. And Venus in particular is part of his journey. With Saturn there, he has themes around his relationships, around his themes with money. And you see that showing up everywhere for him. And this Neptune North Node is in his natal 8th house. So it was in the 2nd house, now it's in the natal 8th house. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I am trying not to get too freaked out and trying to hold hope that, the universe has its own divine plan that I have no idea what it's going to be about. But all I can do is kind of control my own immediate environment as much as I can, and to make a difference in my own environment and to help the people that I can help. So let's just review Neptune and the North Node as themes, and then we'll start to review some charts. Neptune is often called the veil, the deceiver. Liz Green describes Neptune as the subjective feeling of an eternal source, which transcends the limits of time and space and lies beyond the limits of logical thought. Yes, that's exactly how I experience Neptune. In the Hindu tradition, Neptune is described as the water mother, the rhythmic birth and return, life perpetually returning to the cosmic sea from whence it has come, and the birth of a new universe, which itself is eventually dissolved in the primal waters. Human life itself is an illusion. She quotes, "Human life is something fragile that must be periodically be engulfed, because it is the fate of all forms to be dissolved in order to reappear. If forms are not regenerated by being periodically dissolved in water, they will crumble, exhaust their powers of creativity, and finally die away. Now, I want to quote from Ebertein's book, The Combination of Stellar Influences, about the pairing of Neptune and the North Node. Then I'm going to give you some evolutionary astrology perspectives about this combination. According to Ebertein, these are the probable manifestations. On the positive side, it's an inclination to expect more from a community or an association of people. And on the negative side, it is a lack of judgment, leading to wrong ideas about other people or an association, the misfortune of being disappointed, or the tendency to deceive other people. From an evolutionary perspective, Neptune on the nodes can mean there's a need to integrate with a global community in some way. We can be exposed or sensitive to larger collective dynamics. There can be something larger, more important that takes over and requires our attention. And this can require sacrifice. There may be devotion to a higher purpose at this time, a deeper connection with higher meanings. In some cases, it can also mean there is a deletion by these larger currents. So people that are getting caught up in the politics can be deleted by this. That is the harsh part of this signature. The collective takes over. There can also be neglect during this time. There are a lot of lessons about doing it right, a need to transcend one's own needs, take the higher road, not to get caught up in personal attachment. But there's also a balancing here where you don't want to live in denial of your personal needs. You need to pay attention to your self-care during this time, your physical needs. You shouldn't bypass your emotional body. There can also be a level of naivete here. There's an intense fragility and need to re-embrace simplicity, connect with nature, find your authentic self, flush the things that are not you, are not natural, get rid of your persona, connect to your nakedness. There can be a difficulty to integrate in time and space during this time. There is a need to accept our incarnation, our contract, no matter how hard it can be sometimes. Now, people who have Neptune on the nodes could have been at the service to others in prior lifetimes and had to put their own needs on hold. They could have been involved in public affairs. They could have been an influencer or celebrity, had to deal with large-scale community dynamics, led a public life at the expense of a private life, weren't there to take care of their kids because they needed to save the world. This could also have taken a spiritual bent where the spiritual took precedence over the material. They could have been part of religious families where God was more important than anything personal that you were dealing with. Now, in my own life, I was born into a religious family. And this was much a key theme in my life, in my development. So I will say that this is true. And also that I've been journeying toward being less attached and less identified, especially in politics and the things that are happening around me, because it does me no good. And I think it does our country no good to be divided in this way. I've experienced a lot of ruptures in my personal family and in my friendships. And it's not as though, we shouldn't hold fast to our own values. But I think if you dig a little bit deeper, the generalities that are thrown around and the anger that people hold, there's something deeper there. And I think getting angry and holding fast to, your own extreme reactions can bar us from getting to the deeper themes. And unfortunately, I don't have a simple answer here. This is kind of something that I'm still working on myself. But I definitely have seen how destructive this force can be when we're truly identified with these extremes, especially as we're experiencing these larger dynamics, these people that are using us through this propaganda and using us by dividing us, I think that can really affect us individually and can bar us from really finding practical solutions to all of the challenges that we're facing. So I will get off my soapbox. Let's look at some charts. Now I'm going to go through a few charts. I'm going to go through them rather quickly. I don't want to get into the weeds, but I really wanted to start with the 1974 chart, because like I said, this is why I started reviewing this cycle. I reviewed it, the cycle that perfected right before I was born. And I was amazed at some of the patterns that I saw in this chart and how it related to my relationship themes, and also specific milestones in those themes, my relationships with others. And so that's why I think reviewing these cycles in your own chart is so important. I think it can tell you a lot about the themes that are showing up in your life now and why you're repeating them. So in this chart, you can see that here Mars and the North Node and Neptune are all in Sagittarius. And it's a very interesting theme here because, you know, like I said, we're going through similar themes with Sagittarius and Gemini and Virgo and Pisces. They're in square relationship to each other. And then we're also going to be going into a Neptune Aries aspect in a few months. And Mars on Neptune can be very similar to the energy of Neptune in Aries. So let's talk about that. What are the themes of Neptune in Aries? There's an instinct to separate. You know, God's not going to take care of me if I do not take care of myself first. I can't depend on anyone. I can't rely on anyone. I'm on my own. But in this process of separating, they realize that they have powers. They can make a living. They can conquer new grounds, and they are capable of new things. It's about developing a sense of personal power and capacity. And that's what gives me hope. People talk about war and all sorts of things that might happen, and that might happen. We might have to go through that. I hope not. But when you look at it from the bigger picture, there can be positives in each theme in what we're learning. So this theme of being able to be empowered and being able to live according to our own individual source of spirit, and as well as to create, by depending on our own power, we're able to reach out to others eventually and create new partnerships. And then this also can start from a state of innocence, that no boundaries, no consciousness, and then there's a loss of innocence. And then this helps you gain immunity to discern better. So that's the evolutionary journey of that. And it's similar to what I was talking about with that need for discernment with Neptune, Neptune cycles. And we can only learn that sometimes by being conned, unfortunately. I remember when I was a child and I was so open to people. And then, my openness led to people coming into my space and taking advantage of me in some way. So I had to learn that very early on. And I think I go through cycles of that because when you have patterns in your chart, you're always deepening those patterns and cycles. I mean, you can transcend them, but they're always there. They always give you an opportunity to learn, a deeper lesson or a different point of view of that journey, that those lessons show up so that you can really look at the patterns in a variety of ways And, it's a spiral, they say. It's not a linear progression. You go through this spiral and this peeling of an onion, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And sometimes the lessons get more challenging. And so people are like, well, I'm here and I thought my life would be better. No, actually, each step is more challenging. You have to face your fears in a new way. You have to face your patterns in a new way. And it can be extremely challenging when you get stuck. When you're repeating the same mistakes, and you're like, how can I get out of this? It takes a while. It takes a long while to actually, I studied Gurdjieff, and he talks about the octaves and how challenging, how hard it is to go into a new octave. And from my own experience, that's so true. So, Neptune Aries can also be an interference with the divine plan, changing creation in some way, cloning, and that's, all of these things. And you can see this theme play out in this chart with genetic engineering, which started in 1973. The genetic engineering that we know or we relate to today started in 1973. And, that's just continued to evolve. Aries realizes we need to do something actively to protect ourselves. Is this going to be climate, some kind of discovery, technological discovery with climate change, so we can save ourselves, hopefully. So the lesson is to act, but it's according to divine principle. That's the key, and if you fight for the right reasons, it doesn't matter if you're outnumbered. This is the lesson of David and Goliath. If you're fighting for a principle that is about right action, the divine principle, I think it really is tricky here, because some people really do believe, so there's a lot of distortion right now in religion and religious extremism, where they do feel like they have this divine right and this divine principle, and they're fighting for that, with the abortion laws and, the transgender laws and, the immigration laws and things like that. There is a protectionism principle that actually, can keep us safe but separated. And in separation, we find our individuality. That's part of life. That's what we're here to journey into, our individuality. But at some point, there is a unity principle that's beyond that. And so when do we get to that point? I'm not sure. Maybe when Pluto transitions into Pisces, but probably not this year. Neptune in Aries is really going to be about our individuality and our fervor into that place where there's a spiritual element to that. And so I think there's a balancing act, but it's going to be really first, how can I take care of myself? And how can I take active steps to source my inner power? And that may involve, war and things like that. Like I said, I hope not. And you need to know how to defend the truth and be a soldier of justice in your own way, according to your own divine plan. So Ebertin describes the energy of Mars, Neptune in the North Node as a disharmonious attitude, a demonstration of antisocial conduct when in association with others, falsehood, disappointment, undermining a relationship. And so we can see that show up as well, in what we're going to be going into with Neptune and Aries. We can see those themes come to the surface. Now, during this time, the North Node is conjunct the asteroid Arachne. And Arachne was a weaver who dared challenge Athena and was transformed into a spider. Can show talents, but where you may be challenged by others on those abilities. repressing those talents can make one bitter, but thinking too highly of one's abilities can lead to being forced to eat humble pie. Now, during this time, Nixon resigns. So we had that big expose of Nixon, and Gerald Ford becomes president during this time. And, you know, Ford's decision to pardon Nixon was highly controversial. Critics derided the move and said it was a corrupt bargain. And during this time, and you'll see a lot of this in Neptune on North Node charts, that there's a recession. And also there was advertising to try to get people to rally around inflation. Ford went to the American public and asked them to whip inflation now, was his slogan. And he asked people to wear pins that say win. And at the time, inflation was believed to be the primary threat to the economy. And you see that we're going into inflation right now. And, you know, we are kind of in a bubble and we might go into recession. I hope not. But, you know, Neptune on the North Node does have that theme present. And we did sink into the worst recession since the Great Depression. And during this time, the federal budget ran a deficit. Every year Ford was president. And then also when New York City faced bankruptcy in 1975, the federal government or Ford declined to support them. And during this time, New York Daily News had a famous headline, "Ford to City, drop dead." And so you see kind of that same or similar theme showing up with Trump refusing to support California unless they agree to certain terms. And then also the swine flu pandemic was big at this time. So Neptune also can bring in epidemics. That's why people are talking about that. And then there was a big plane crash in Kenya, and you see that the Neptune and North Node is in Sagittarius. You know, that's really demonstrative of flight. And then also a British Parliament, his name was John Stonehouse, faked his own death. You know, Neptune, the deceiver, faked his own death. He was found out, but he was trying to avoid some things that were happening in his life. And then the Vietnam War was winding down. So there was a dissolution of war during this time. So there can be a dissolution. And so that was that chart. And then I'm really going to go quickly into Neptune in the South Node themes, because I found, you know, that they're related in a lot of ways. And like I said, there's that pendulum. And you see that there's this Uranus Jupiter conjunction right next to the Neptune on the South Node conjunction that year. And if you see the prior chart, you see that Neptune North Node was at 10 degrees Sagittarius, and here it is with Uranus Jupiter at very close to those degrees, and then Neptune on the South Node. And this was Reagan's first term. And so the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction made for an optimistic lookout and the ending of a recession soon after he took office. And Reagan really talks about coming together as a nation during his State of the Union address. And so there's a big change, and a big change for the better. And, you know, Uranus and Jupiter were not on the Neptune, you know, we're not very close to the Neptune North Node conjunction, but we did just have one recently in Taurus, and that was ruled by Venus. So there is going to be a big change, and maybe I'll create another video about that. I don't want to go too much into that during this video. But the most significant event during this time period was the official birth of the internet. All the way back in 1983, there was on January 1st, the ARPANET transitioned to the TCP/IP protocol, marking the beginning of a standardized network communication system. Other notable events during this time period was the launch of an infrared astronomical satellite on January 25th, and the breakthrough of the pilot shaft of the Seikan Tunnel, the world's longest undersea tunnel in Japan on January 27th. So really, Uranus and Jupiter are here in Sagittarius, and it's very much connected to these massive technological changes in communication and travel. Which is very representative of this time. And also, I found this interesting that Trump, during 1983, opened Trump Tower. And there's this big photo of Roy Cohn. I think that's how you pronounce his name, Roy Cohn. He was in the news during the last Donald Trump presidency. And so there was a big article with him and Roy Cohn, and it's interesting because Roy Cohn was an American lawyer and prosecutor known for his role as Senator Joseph McCarthy's chief counsel during the Army McCarthy hearings, and that was a big expose of the entertainment industry. And right now, you see that we're having a big shakeup in the entertainment industry from a variety of directions. And we're entering into a square relationship right now. The Neptune on the South Node is in Sagittarius in a late degree. And now we're having Neptune and Neptune and the North Node in Pisces, which is in square relationship. Pisces is here in a square relationship to this South Node Neptune degree. And I thought it was very interesting because some of the judicial appointments that Reagan, put on, some of the judges that he put into office were contesting some of the recent unconstitutional moves made by Trump. And, it's very interesting because the Republicans have been for a while these stalwarts for the Constitution, and it seems that we're transitioning out of this, at least from the Republican Party's perspective. I've been hearing a lot about the Constitution from the Democrats, which is just bizarre because it does seem to be switching sides a bit. So that movement is quite interesting. Okay, so in the next cycle of the Neptune and the North Node in 1991, you see up here that Uranus is on the North Node with Neptune. And so there's a lot of change happening in this cycle, and we'll see that in the next cycle as well. And it's, happening in Capricorn in the 10th house. And this is square relationship to the Sun, Mercury, and Mars in Libra in the 7th house. Now, Ebertin describes this combination of energies as the inability to become an integrated unit of a community, owning to an unrestrained self-will, inclination to get upset over the antisocial conduct of others, a sudden undermining or destruction of relationships again. And, the Sun conjunct Mercury and Mars is, the will to fight, agitated thinking and quarrels. And then it's also on this fixed star, Acela, which is, it gives good fortune and happiness. There's a drama and sense of spectacle. And I wanted to talk about the shifting power dynamics that's happening. There's a focus on social and environment responsibility and an emergence of new social and political movements, a challenge to traditional authority and technological advancements in governance. Bush was president for one term that ended in 1992. Now, Bush was widely seen as a pragmatic caretaker president who lacked a unified and compelling long-term theme in his efforts. And so that theme is really showing up. And there was also a recession during this time again. And then also a dissolution of the Soviet Union. And so that's interesting to think about. But Senator Ted Kennedy, led the congregational passage of a separate civil rights bill, designed to facilitate launching employment discrimination lawsuits. And Bush at first vetoed this bill because he argued that it would lead to racial quotas in hiring. But in 1991, he signed the Civil Rights Act of 1991, which is similar to the bill he had vetoed in the previous year. So again, there is an emergence of new social and political movements, a new direction that was taken by, Ted Kennedy was kind of the proponent of that. And then Bush nominated at this time the conservative federal judge Clarence Thomas, who's been in the news. And then after the Gulf War concluded, his approval rating saw a high of 89% before gradually declining for the rest of the year and eventually falling below 50%. His sudden drop in favorability was likely due to the early 1990s recession, which shifted his image from a conquering hero, this Neptune North Node Uranus in the 10th house, to a politician befuddled by economic matters. And you see Pluto and the moon are Pluto is on the cusp of the 8th house, and Pluto and moon in Scorpio is about financial matters. And so we see all of this change and also recession and change in his favorability as we're trying to figure out how to get out of the recession, and then also his movement to defend and pass the Civil Rights Act of 1991. Capricorn and Cancer are often present in racial matters, and the U.S. Sibley chart sun is in Cancer. And so this is a reoccurring theme. And you see that Trump's Venus and Saturn are in Cancer, and his out of bounds Mercury. And we see a lot of actually people in this time period, important people like Elon Musk, and then the person that just got elected for Secretary of Defense. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but he has Mercury in Cancer. And so this is about an emotional appeal to the United States. And we do have an underbelly of racism in the United States. So it's very not surprising to see some of those signatures, unfortunately. And then in 1991, this is interesting, the World Wide Web debuts as an internet service during this time. And it's its official birthday. The Transfer Control Protocol Internetwork protocol was established. And so that's interesting. And then we see in the South Node that Neptune was conjunct again, the South Node in Aquarius, this time with Uranus there in the 6th house. And this was the time that between George Bush and Al Gore, there was the controversial and inconclusive results of the election, which had to be decided by the courts. And healthcare was a central theme in this election. You see that the South Node and Uranus and Neptune are in the 6th house. And that is often about it can be a symbol of healthcare. And it was a theme. There can be technological advancements in healthcare during this time, the rise of telemedicine, gene editing and personalized medicine, and the focus on preventative health and public health initiatives, in which there were, Bush really tackled prescriptions during his time in office. And there's a focus on, welfare and things like that of the country. Okay, so let's move on to the 2008 chart. And you see that Neptune and the North Node and Chiron were here in the sixth house again. And this was in 2008, and this was when Obama was elected. And you know that he also had, reforming healthcare was on his agenda, and he accomplished that during his presidency. And like I said, there's an inclination to expect more from a community, and toward healing wounds in service is the big theme with Chiron, and also around healthcare and creating different ways to get the community involved. There's again, there can be technological advancements in medicine. We focus on preventative healthcare and public health initiatives, reforms within the healthcare system, emergence of new forms of social service as well during this time. And so it's, it is conjunct the fixed star Deneb Al-Gadi, and this promotes development of the mind and the kind of successes which result. Works best when aiming to make the world a better place, and there's a caution avoid getting too caught up in material matters. And Saturn is also on that south node, so there's a pragmatic bent that needs to happen during this time to get what needs to be accomplished. So, dealing with practicalities and not getting focused on some of the material concerns. And, this was the first African-American president to be elected during this time. It was also the Great Recession. So again, we see a recession theme that comes up. This was the subprime mortgage crisis. We've got Pluto in the fourth house of this chart. And Kosovo declared independence during this time. So it is a dissolution of some kind. And there was the arrest of Bernie Madoff. So there's deception and being charged for that deception. Saturn's on the south node. So it's about, Saturn is a direct karma to our actions in the past. And so you see that Bernie Madoff was caught for his Ponzi theme during this time. And there was a lot of people that were angered and lost a lot of savings from investing in this Ponzi scheme, which is very much, I think, what's going on in our financial system right now. But I won't talk about that too much. Okay, so there's also foodborne illnesses during this time. There was a big salmonella outbreak during this time. It affected 43 U.S. states and Canada and the District of Columbia. And it was linked to contaminated food, including peanut butter, cantaloupe, and ground turkey. So that's interesting. And then there was a big tornado outbreak that year. Okay. So let's look at 2015. This is what I was referring to earlier. It was the last minor lunar standstill. And in November 2016 was when Trump last won office. And so, again, there's this Chiron theme. And remember, I said that he has Chiron on his Neptune in Libra. And so both of these, time periods are important for him. And, Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. And he did go after Obama pretty stealthily with racial undertones during this time. And it's interesting because you see this T square with Saturn, Mercury, that really is in conjunction again with or square to the previous time period that I was just speaking to in when Reagan was in office. So this is very interesting. So the possible manifestations of this signature is widespread social and political unrest, disillusionment with existing systems, and a growing sense of alienation. There's an environmental crisis happening, ignoring environmental warnings and facing the consequences of climate change and environmental degradation. the rise of extremist ideologies, a search for meaning and belonging in extremist groups and movements, and the need for collective healing, a growing emphasis on mental health, trauma recovery, and spiritual practices. Now, we do see that those were themes that were big during this time and are still big today. Okay, so let's look at the current chart. Now, as you can see, Neptune is on the North Node with Saturn and Venus, like I mentioned. So we're having a combination of these energies, and it's all in the Washington's 4th house. So it really describes this theme around, going on our own, actually, and protectionism, and thinking about the homeland, and it'll be interesting to see Neptune transition into Aries, because that's a similar theme, which is about, okay, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we get people out of the country that we no longer want in the country, illegal immigrants, and how do we close ourselves up, and what results in that? It's a big theme. It's trine Mars in Cancer in the 8th house, and Cancer is retrograde. So there's a lot of renegotiation of partnerships. Ebertine describes this as the feeling of being neglected by others, being misunderstood or lonely, emotional suffering through falsehood, deception, fraud, separation, and illness. Doesn't sound great. His descriptions don't sound great, though. His view of the North Node is quite pessimistic, I would say. And so, there's let's see, what do I have here? There's an interpretation that that there's social and political movements focusing on social justice and environmental protection, which, yes, we can already see that that's going to be a big theme. There's going to be reforms. I don't know about this. This sounds very unlikely, but maybe because of what's been going on, we're going to have reforms to housing policies and hopefully an increased access to affordable housing. I can't see that in this new administration, but hopefully, and a growing emphasis on environmental sustainability and the development of green infrastructure. I can see this with technology improvements. I definitely can see this. And then there's a cultural renaissance that celebrates diversity and inclusivity. That doesn't sound too promising. But like I said, you never know what's actually going to happen. When you try to control these things, other things happen as a result, because every action has a reaction. And sometimes it's not exactly the way that you think it's going to turn out. And there's an, emergence of new forms of community and belonging. So there's big changes that are happening. And, sometimes it can look quite positive and sometimes it can look quite negative. And I think you just have to keep in mind that there are larger forces at work and we can't see all the possible manifestations. I also really think this finger of God is interesting. It's dealing with the midheaven here, but there's an adjusting energy to, our plutocrats, Pluto and Aquarius, and to this Venus in Aries. Okay, well, how do we need to accomplish what we need to accomplish with maybe technology's help, and how can we go it alone? How can we, develop different partnerships to create more independence from the country, to go out and to become our own self-sustaining country without having to rely so much on our other countries and our partnerships that are no longer working. Maybe, I mean, people have different views on that. but sometimes you can't see the forest through the trees, and sometimes you have to make a big dramatic shift, positively or negatively, to really make a change towards something new, to get out of old partnerships that are just that are actually toxic, because you're repeating the same cycles and getting nowhere. But I definitely see that there is this fury, and trying to keep the United States as this global superpower, and trying to make the dollar continue to remain the currency of the world. And I think we're going to see some surprises here. I think there's going to be some consequences to all of the grandstanding and the power control, the muscling of power that we're doing in the international community. And maybe that will bring us to realize that we're more interdependent than we realize. That's what I see right now. I think that it's, you see through cycles of time that nobody stays on top forever. Now it's only a matter of time that the United States, is no longer the superpower. Now, I'm not going to predict that at all. I don't particularly want to be in a recession, or to feel the consequences of not having access to the resources that we need and the community that we need with each other. That's why I think it's really, really so sad that we've been divided so much as a country, because, at the end of the day, we need each other, especially the people that are in our communities. Now, I think the smaller communities are going to flourish more than the larger communities, and maybe that's the direction that we need to go. So I just wanted to give you kind of a more zoomed out perspective of this transit, and try to give you some hope for the future. We might definitely be going into recession, but at the end of the day, it might be for the best as we grapple with these larger issues of interdependence on the world, and how we need to make the world a better place from the larger community perspective, because we depend on each other as well. And we are not able to go into this isolationism as we used to be able to do in the past. That's the past. We're growing so much in population. We have to figure out how to get along with a wider community. That is just a reality, I think. I don't think we're going to be able to cut ourselves off from this larger global network of people. I don't think we're going to be able to go back as much as people want us to go back. I don't think that that's possible. So hopefully this was helpful to you and not too much information, but thank you again for your support. And I will do another deep dive. My next deep dive is Mars Pluto. Hopefully that will be launching soon. Thank you. Bye. The last major lunar standstill was in June 2006. Do you remember this time period? I do. It's when I started dating my current partner, and I do remember the energies were quite dramatic that year. The last minor lunar standstill was in November 2015. I bet you can remember that time period. That was when the nodes were flipped, and we were having the North Node in Libra, ruled by Venus. And so for us in the States, that just happened to be when Trump was running for office in the first. The last major lunar standstill was in June 2006. Do you remember this time period? I do. It's when I started dating my current partner, and I do remember the energies were quite dramatic that year. The last minor lunar standstill was in November 2015. I bet you can remember that time period. That was when the North Node was in Libra. And think about that time period versus now, when the nodes are flipped. For those of us in the States, this just happened to be when Trump was running for his first term in office. We are at the other end of that cycle now. And you see how the tides have turned much more favorable